Welcome to Your College Bound Kid,
a podcast for parents, college counselors, students, and anyone who wants a weekly deep dive into the world of college admissions.
My name is Linda, and I'm originally from Michigan, now living in the St. Louis metro area. I'm a college coach with School Match for You and have a daughter at University of Chicago.
I'm Lisa, and I'm a clinical psychologist and college counselor. I have a daughter in college, a daughter in high school, and a son in middle school. After 30 years in Chicago, we recently moved to North Carolina.
My name is Mark. I'm a college coach in Atlanta and the parent of two daughters. Karis, a graduate of Davidson College, and she is the founder of the Spanish tutoring company, SpanishHelpToday.com. And Joy is a wellness coach at the Keenan Flagler Business School at the University of North Carolina in Chapel Hill. And I'm so blessed to be able to work alongside both my beautiful daughters at School Match for You, college counseling firm that I founded in 2010.
Good afternoon, friends. I had a great week. Lots of very exciting things to share with you today. I have a zillion announcements today. I almost feel like I should call this the announcement episode. On a personal note, most of our listeners are very astute, and you probably noticed a few weeks ago I was doing a segment with Lisa, and very, very open at the start. She said, "How's it going?" And I said, "It's going." Some of you probably thought, I'm not used to stuff being so negative. That's because I was dealing with a pinched nerve, and that thing was painful. Apparently, you can get that from bad posture. And that actually makes a lot of sense because a lot of times at night when I sleep on my back with pillows, and they're almost at a 45-degree angle. Okay, all right, too much information. Enough about your sleeping patterns. Well, the bottom line is this. It just feels great to be pain-free. Another really cool story happened to me this week. So my daughter Karis, she's always traveling around somewhere. So I was taking her to the airport on Thursday to spend a few weeks in Chicago. By the way, she gets back from Chicago, and Karis and Anitra are going to Canada for most of April. They'll be there when I'm in Texas. But let me stop digressing and get back to the story. So I drop her off at the airport, and I say, "Hey, you haven't been to your favorite Caribbean place in a while." It's like right on the way back. So I go into tropical cuisine. I place my order. I'm just sitting inside on the bench, scrolling my phone, and this lady approaches me. And she says, "I'm sorry I don't remember your name, but you're the KIPP guy." Now, for you newer listeners, KIPP is the largest charter school network in the country. I don't even know how many schools they have. I'm sure it's over 300 by now. But I worked there as director of high school placement and then director of college placement from 2009 until January of 2023. So we get to talking, and so mom's name is Kathleen, and she said I could share her name. I told her I was going to share the story on the podcast. So we get to talking, and I said, how's it going with Jalen, her son? And she said, "It turns out he's a stamp scholar now at Georgia State." So this is 5th grade when I was talking to her. Now, if you're not familiar with stamps, it's really, really hard to get. It's full cost of attendance. I only give 10 away a year. So why am I telling you this story? So I distinctly remember Kathleen and her husband, they come in, they meet me when Jalen's in the 5th grade, just to find out how this process works. What do they need to be doing as parents to set up their student for success? And I'm sitting here, I'm having a conversation, with Kathleen. I just had this epiphany. I just started thinking of all the parents over the 14 years I was at KIPP that I met when their kid was in the 5th and 6th grade and what they're doing now. I thought about the Cornegie family. Their son is getting a PhD at UNC Chapel Hill. I met them in 6th grade, and their daughter's getting a PhD at Stanford. And I won't bore you with all of the others, and let's face it, getting a doctorate is not on the cards for most people, nor should it be. And there are many paths to a successful career. And please don't misunderstand what I'm saying. I'm not saying you need to start the college process in the 5th grade, or your kid's in the 5th grade, or the 6th grade. But if you heard our episode last week, I differentiated between starting the college process and learning and getting a fundamental understanding of how things work and how your student will be evaluated. And doing that early can really lead to you spending your money, your time, and your investment in ways that have a good return on your investment, making prudent decisions, at least from the perspective of college admissions. And I know not everything needs to revolve around college admissions. I certainly believe that. But you are listening to a podcast called Your College Bound Kid. So I thought I'd share that. Friends, a listener sent in a tip about college visits this week and something we had talked about a few years ago. I thought the tip was fantastic. And I asked if I could share it this week because originally it was like going to go in episode 600. And I said, I'll play it again then. So the next voice you're going to hear is from a mom with a college student and a current junior in high school.
Hi, Mark and team. I've been listening to the Your College Bound Kid podcast for years. I think I started when my daughter was a sophomore in high school, and she's a freshman in college now. And I now have a junior in high school who we are going through the college process with. I wanted to share one of the best tips that I have gotten from listening to this podcast and encourage parents to do it. One of the things that I learned was that when you do a campus visit to a college, that you could reach out ahead of time. You can do it through your admissions counselor to start, and then they can pass it on to whoever it needs to be passed on to. But to ask to meet with a professor in a department that your student is interested in, maybe majoring in, or in a field they're interested in, that has turned out to be one of the most helpful things for my kids, for both of them. Some schools never provided a professor, and others did. And those tended to be the places that my kids have been drawn to, was where they could sit down and meet with a professor, talk with them, have a personal connection. And then many times the professor has emailed my student, my kid, after that visit and kept in contact with them. In fact, my daughter, who's a freshman in college now, she is on a study abroad trip to Greece, and the professor leading this trip was the professor who met with her when she came and visited the school for the first time. They talked for an hour. He kept in contact with her, and now he's leading the study abroad program where she's in Greece right now. And it's just a really neat benefit to that relationship that she's built. But I just wanted to encourage you to do that. Reach out to your admissions counselor. Ask if there's a professor who'd be willing to meet with your child, or have your student send that email. My junior in high school just sent that email a couple weeks ago when she went to visit a school, and she had a nursing instructor give her a private tour of the whole nursing department and sat down in a conference room and met with her for a good long while. So have either you or your student reach out and ask to meet with a professor. I don't think you will be disappointed.
Now, friends, anytime we play a message on the air, tip or question, you're eligible for Princeton Review to send you one of 4 books that they have graciously agreed to donate to our listeners. Now, you're going to get your choice of one of 4 books from the Princeton Review. So you got the best 390 colleges. That was 2025. And that's by Robert Frenick, David Soto, Stephen Koch, and Aaron Riccio. College Admissions 101, 3rd edition by Robert Frenick. Essays That Kicked Apps, 55 Unforgettable College Application Essays That Got Students Accepted by the Princeton Review staff. Or book number 4, Princeton Review Digital SAT Prep 2025. And Penguin Random House is the publisher of all of these books. Now, in order to get your book, you just need to email me directly at mark@schoolmatch4u.com. Put Princeton Review giveaway in the subject heading, and I'll know right away that you've sent in a question or we've read one of your comments. We read your comment on the air through SpeakPipe, you also get a book. Just put that in the subject line. If you remember the episode it ran on, put that in the subject header or in the body of your email to let me know which question you asked. And remember to let me know in the body of your email which question you asked. In the body of your email, also put your name and full address with zip code. I'll get your request submitted to Princeton Review within 24 hours. Once again, thanks to the Princeton Review for their generosity. I said last week that I'm going to Texas to visit 10 colleges in April. Well, I believe in go big or go home. I added 2 more colleges to the list. It's now a 3-week trip. My dates are set. And why is it taking so long, you're thinking? Because I like to visit one school a day. 3.5 hours, meet with admissions, talk to a bunch of students. And then the longer I live, the more I just need time to imbibe the place. I need time to reflect and to think about what I just experienced. And I'm driving. Every now and then I need a good drive. Not like Colorado, like I did a couple of years ago when I ended up having knee surgery. But this is a good 780-mile drive. So I'm going to go to Shreveport the first day. And then I'll be in Dallas, Texas, my old stomping grounds where I lived for 7.5 years. I'll be there from the 11th to the 15th. I'll check out SMU and UTD, University of Texas, Dallas, and Richardson. I'll get together with Kevin and some longtime Dallas friends. On the 16th, it's Baylor University in Waco. 17th, UT Austin in Austin, Texas. 18th, Southwestern University in Georgetown. And then I'm going to stay in the Riverwalk from the 19th to the 22nd, but I'll check out Trinity University and UTSA. That's a new addition, University of Texas, San Antonio. And then in 22, I'm going to Belton, Texas. I'll say something about that in a second. On the 23rd, I'll be in College Station, Texas A&M. And by the way, a listener wrote in and said, you said Texas A&M is part of the UT system. It's part of the Texas A&M system, which is different from the UT system. So I'm thankful for that, listener. And you see why I need a 3-week trip to Texas to brush up on my Texas schools. And then on the 24th is the drive day, 25th, TCU, Fort Worth. And I'll get together with several people, including Heath Einstein. I'll be seeing students on all these trips as well. On the 28th, Monday, UT Arlington. And then on the 29th, I'm going to North Texas, Denton. And then the 30th, Austin College in Sherman, and then I head home. So, a couple of things. Our listeners are absolutely the best. And I announced this trip last week, and within 24 hours, 2 people reached out and said, I'd love to host a reception. And I said yes. So we're going to be doing a reception in 17th of April in Austin, Texas, and one in the 22nd in Bentley, Texas. And the sign-up should be up by next Monday's episode. If you live in those areas or close to those areas or near any of my travels, I love meeting listeners when I'm on the road. I lived in Dallas for 7.5 years, but I've been back 10 times since then. And we left literally 30 years ago, 1995. But I've never been back for 3 days. So I'm kind of stoked and juiced to get 3 weeks back in Texas. I love my time in Texas. My other 2 states I'm visiting in 2025 are in Ohio in September, NACAX in Columbus. I'll spend a week visiting, maybe 2 weeks visiting Ohio schools. I'll get to Pittsburgh as well then. And then another really cool thing happened to me this week. I talk to groups about college all the time. In fact, literally, I'll be talking to a group of parents in Tucson, Arizona in less than an hour. I'm not kidding. But I got an email this week by Zoom, of course. I can't get to Tucson that fast. I got an email from my old school, Westtown, saying, you started this huge college fair 20 years ago, and the fair and the program are still growing strong, and we'd love for you to be our keynote speaker. So I accepted immediately. I'll be going back to my old stomping grounds. My kids are going with me October 11th to speak do the keynote address there to the parents and college students. Every once in a while you have a moment where your life just flashes in front of you, and that's what happened to me. I read the email and I said, 20 years? Feels like it was the other day. There's a verse in the Bible that says, what is your life but a vapor that appears for a while and vanishes away? Like life is just like puffing it, blowing the air out, and you see the puff and it's gone. So I'm also going to stay there for at least a week. I'll check out Villanova, St. Joe's, Temple, Delaware, and who knows. And then in 2026, I'm going to Boston, Connecticut, and Minnesota, but that's too far in advance to know dates. Friends, I thought I'd share with you upcoming interviews that we already have on the docket. Every once in a while I like to do this. These are a bunch of interviews that you'll hear definitely through this year in 2025. Some have already been done. Some are already being done in March. Some are being done in April. Some are being done over the summer. So after my interview with Kathleen deLaski, you're going to hear an interview I've already done actually with Don Williamson, Senior Executive for Comcast Advertising. And Don is the Chief Revenue Officer for Media Solutions. She hires hundreds of people and has over the years. Thought I'd do a different kind of interview. She's going to talk about what she looks for when she hires college grads. And as parents, it's good for you to listen and hear what matters in hiring decisions so you can work on inculcating these things into your student now. I also have interviews coming up with Jim Bach, who's the VP and Dean of Admissions at Swarthmore, Kelly Walter, and by the way, Jim's been there for 35 years, Kelly Walter, Associate VP of Admissions, Dean of Admissions, Associate VP of Enrollment, Dean of Admissions at Boston University, been there for 42 years, Janine Lalonde, Associate Dean of Admissions at University of Virginia, 20 years there, and Nate Havman, VP of Admissions at Hope in Michigan. I have to tell you a really cool story about this interview with Nate. That came because a listener thinks you guys haven't done anything on Hope College, and Hope's a great school. And that listener knew Nate, and he connected us. So I'm putting it out there. If you have someone who a senior level admissions person, and we haven't done a spotlight on that school, I can't promise for sure, but there's a good chance we will if you connect me with that person. We like to bring new schools to people, and part of what's really difficult with this process is getting through the red tape of setting it up. If I've got someone who set it up for me and it's a school of interest, I'd be happy to do it. We also have Dylan Sanchez from Colorado College. I'm excited about that. He'll be the 5th different person I've interviewed from Colorado College since we formed our partnership with them 3 years ago. He's over transfer admissions. We're going to be looking at the transfer application. He's also an athletic liaison, so I'll do a segment with him on athletics. I have another interview coming up with 2 of my former students who transferred. So you'll get transferred twice from a student perspective and from the transfer admission liaison perspective. And then Jared Rosenberg, he is been at UNC, Dean of Admissions, been there for 25 years. I'm doing that one over the summer. And all of those are like first-time interviewees, haven't been on our podcast before. Heath Einstein, one of my favorite admissions folks from TCU, doing that one over the summer. And then I got an exciting interview with David Blowbaum. So that one should be interesting. David and I have been communicating for over a year. He's a big advocate of the use of standardized testing. We've had some very civil debates. And, we've had many advocates of test optional and no harm testing on the podcast. But we want to bring you all kinds of perspectives. So I thought it would be important for you to hear his perspective. We're doing that interview coming up here pretty soon. I also have an interview with Peg Keogh, Chief Academic Officer at College Aid Pro. We're going to be talking everything you need to know about FAFSA and CSS profile. And then Jennifer Mandel, who I work with as a counselor on our team. She's not on the podcast. Jen said something about 4 months ago, a couple of things that were pretty profound. And I remember thinking in the back of my mind, man, our podcast listeners need to hear that. I kind of let it go. And then in the last month, she said a couple more profound things. I'm like, all right, Jen, I need you to come on. I need you to share all these things that you've been saying to me on our podcast. I'm excited for you to hear 4 different topics from Jen. And then Lisa's got a really big interview coming up. It's with the 2 authors of the book everyone's talking about, who wrote The Disengaged Teenager, journalist Jenny Anderson and educational expert Rebecca Winthrop. And the book explores the causes of disengagement with teenagers, such as technology and the pandemic. You might have seen them. They've been touring national TV quite a bit, talking about their book. And finally, I have another interview with someone who's been on NBC 35 times. It's Rob Frenick, and he was on once before, but he is going to talk about Princeton Review's latest College Hopes and Worries study. We also have 2 webinars. I want to, get the signups up for these, at least the first one, within a week. And that's with Jen Chow, co-founder of Polygence. You might have heard my interview with Jen. Well, Jen and Maureen reached out for me from Polygence. They said they had a surge of families who listened to our podcast who called and signed up, for sessions to do research projects with Polygence after hearing the interview. So I'm like, well, let's do a webinar. So we're going to do that on Sunday, April 13th, 8 Eastern, 7 Central, 6 Mountain, 5 Pacific. And we'll have a sign-up sheet up by next Thursday for that. And if you really like Kathleen deLaski, you'll hear parts 4 and 5 the next 2 weeks on Monday's episodes. We'll be doing a webinar later. It's not on the calendar yet, but it'll be summer with Kathleen. You can ask her all her questions. She's really insightful. I think you'll enjoy that one as well. So all of that was announcements. See why I call it the announcement episode? Now I'm going to get into the meat of our episode today, which is updates on the Common App. I'm also going to share a few admission tips for you about the Common App. And I originally was going to do a deep dive on how you can tell if a college is sound financially. But as I started getting into the research, first thing I was like, oh, this is going to take over an hour. Then I was like, oh, it's going to take over 2 hours. First, I was going to do all of the aggregators that do the work for you. And then I was going to do part 2 on how you can self-assess. But now I'm going to go piecemeal, parcel it out, individually pick one topic here, one topic there, and we'll do it over a series of time. And so I'm not going to do it consecutively because I got other things I want to talk to you guys about as well. But today I'm going to talk about Forbes College Financial Grades, explain it in depth. What is it? How do they come up with it? Who do they assess? Who is it good for? And then we'll have part 4 or 5, my interview with Kathleen deLaski on her book, Who Needs College? But let's dive right in right now and let's talk about the changes coming up to the Common App. A couple of pretty significant changes, in my opinion. I have to tell you this right away. I like them. I like them a lot. So Common App has 7 prompts for personal statements. None of them have changed. This is year 3 in a row. No changes there. So it's nothing to do with that. But the changes that they're making, one has to do with the general additional information section. And I like this change. So you might have heard me say the 6 additional information, it's like 650 words. It's like your blank slate of paper for you to talk about anything that you think is important about you for an admission officer to understand that might not have come through in your application. That's the easiest way to put it. I've been saying to my students for a long time, don't take the full 650. Respect the time of the admission officer. And so now they have made that easier because they're giving you 300 words, which is plenty of space. So that's one big change. I like it a lot. Nobody needed 650 words. 300 is fine if you need to take that. And many people should take advantage of that. The other change I like a lot as well. So let me give you some history. So back in 2020 or maybe 2021, Common App had what we called the COVID question. You could write a 250-word essay on whether COVID had impacted you. Well, a lot of people were saying other things have impacted me. So that led to what was called the community disruption essay, also 250 words. And I would say to my students, let's say you've been impacted by a hurricane or tornado or fires or something. It's a great place to write about it. Well, now they're giving much more lucid details on this. They are changing the name of it from community disruption to challenges and circumstances question. I like it. And they're also giving you 11 different topics that if any of these apply to you, then you're a good candidate to write this challenges or circumstances 250-worder. This is in addition to your 650-worder, right? So let me go through them. One is, have you struggled having access to a safe and quiet place to study? Then you're a good candidate for this. If you have struggled having access to reliable internet or technology, this is for you. If you have struggled with violence or protests or teacher strikes or some type of discrimination, this is for you. With discrimination, this is for you. With family disruptions, and they give examples like loss of a family member, addiction, job loss, health, divorce, this is for you. If you have studied with family or other obligations such as financial support, maybe you've had to work to help pay bills for your family, caretaking, this is for you. If you've struggled with housing instability, homelessness, or displacement, this is for you. If you've struggled with military deployment, not even struggled. If you've been involved in military deployment or activation, this is for you. Natural disasters, of course, that was similar to community disruption. Physical health and mental health. That's very broad, by the way, physical health and mental health. And the last category, war, genocide, or other hardships. The point is this, and here's the 3 tips I want to give you on this. Take advantage of this prompt. The overwhelming majority of people will have something that fits in that category. And it's an opportunity for admission officers to get to know you more. Second tip, don't write on prompt 2 for your 650-word personal statement if you are going to take advantage of this. What is prompt 2, you say? Let me read it. The lessons we take from obstacles we encounter can be fundamental to later success. Recount a time when you faced a challenge, a setback, a failure. How did it affect you? What did you learn from the experience? Okay. You don't need to be redundant. Every time an admission officer looks at any portion of your application, they should learn something new about you. Respect their time. You guys always hear me say, respect the competition. Respect the admission officer's time. So don't pick prompt 2 if you're gonna write on this. That's my second tip. And my last tip is keep an optimistic tone. It's very important. Let me give you an example. Let's say you struggled with pulmonary fibrosis. Some of you thinking, Stuck, didn't you know these medical terms? I looked it up. I didn't know it before yesterday. All right, so that's a lung disease that involves scarring. So let's say you missed a lot of school. Instead of going on and saying, I have pulmonary fibrosis, and I missed the prom, and I'm probably going to miss graduation, and I couldn't play sports, and I couldn't go to my clubs, and what's going on, it starts to take on a woe is me tone. I never forget on the fly-in I had to Smith College, talking with Deanna Dixon, their director of admission, and she said, there's 12 of us there. She said, can I give you guys some tips? Please don't have your kids write all of these woe is me essays. Like, we have to read these things. You know how hard it is to read woe is me for 30 or 40 or 50 a day? So you got to describe it, and you have to describe how it impacted you, but here's how you have more of an optimistic tone. You say something like, I don't think I really ever thought about the air that I breathe. And now I think about air every day. And I am so grateful that I can breathe the air. And then you could go on. You could talk about so many people have lung disease and they die. And this isn't terminal. It's going to impact me in certain ways, but I'm so fortunate. I have an appreciation for the air I breathe. That's how you write in a way that showcases your optimism, which, by the way, that's one of those subtle personal qualities that really adds value. If you can be an optimist, if that can come through in the tone of your application, you're enhancing your value. So that's just another aside. All right, I just thought of a fourth tip, so I'm going to throw it in. I have to make up for lost time. I haven't been giving you tips or big numbers or admissions vernaculars very much lately. Go ahead and do this. You know what the question is, juniors? You know that it's 250 words? Bang it out. Get it done. You don't have to do it right now, but do it over the summer. You don't need to do this while in the fall when you're juggling all the other balls or after the custom prompts come out August 1st. Like, get this puppy done now before August 1st. All right, so that's all I wanted to say on the Common App. But I personally really like these changes. I think they're exciting. I'm really happy about them. All right, so now I'm going to turn my attention to something that just came out as in 2 days ago, and it's Forbes College Financial Grades. So Forbes College Financial Grades is something they've started doing in 2013, where they assign a letter grade to a whole bunch of colleges based on their financial health. And I'm going to tell you how they come up with the grade, and then after that, I'm going to tell you what I think about it. But I want to read a little bit to you from an article that just came out with the grades, because there's an article that comes out with the grades. So this is a quote from former president at Rhodes College. Her name's Marjorie Haas, and she's president of the Council of Independent Schools. And she says, college leaders have had more than a decade to prepare for the so-called enrollment cliff, but Trump's full-on assault could be the black swan that finally sends struggling tuition-dependent schools to the graveyard. The current and unexpected threats to college, such as the radical cuts to federal funding of research and student aid, are more immediately likely to spur campus disasters than the more gradual and foreseeable demographic shifts. And I actually believe that. This is a bigger threat to colleges than demographic cliff, than the reduction in birth rate. So how does Forbes come up with this? Well, here's where I got to get technical. There's no other way to do it than to get technical. I hope I don't bore you guys. So they have these 9 categories. And listen, this is formula driven. No formula is perfect. I'm going to go through each of the 9 categories in the formula and tell you what I think about them, whether I think they're legit or not, and how much weight they assign to them. So the biggest one is endowment assets per student, per what we call FTE or full-time equivalent. So that's 17.5% in their formula. I actually think this is important. This measures the total endowment assets divided by the number of full-time equivalent students. So the reason why this is important is well, I'm going to give you an example. It's like one family has an emergency fund and another family doesn't. If you have an emergency fund, then you can weather storms, because if you lose your job or something, you're okay. So endowment, right? It sits there. It's like that nest egg fund. It grows interest and it spews that money off into the operating budget. And it's getting more than just like money market rate, because professionals are managing it. They're managing it conservatively so you don't lose the principal. But the average endowment is getting 7 or 8% in most years. So, back in 2012, I put together a 10-hour video series, and I really went in depth in endowment. I used Richmond as an example. At the time, their endowment was kicking off $100 million into their operating budget per year. I've looked at their endowment now. It's over $3 billion for a little more than 3,000 undergraduates. So now it's double that. So think of $200 million automatically influx into your operating budget. Think of that. Do you know how many tuitions you need? Like, keep in mind, even when you see a high price tag on a school, most private schools are the school's actually getting less than half of that when you take away either need-based aid or merit-based aid. So even if you take a school of 60,000, a school may be getting 26, 27, 28,000. It takes a lot of money to make up 200 million. So I think this is an important one. It's an important indicator of financial health for some schools. And I'll say more about that in a second. The second thing they look at is called primary reserve ratio. Now, every school I looked at, every formula I looked at that was fairly sophisticated had primary reserve ratio in there. And it's 15% in this formula. And the ratio evaluates a college's liquidity by determining how long it can cover expenses using expendable assets without straining resources. So think of it as this way. How long could your emergency fund go if you weren't working before you'd be out of money? So that's like primary reserve ratio. So once again, I think that's really good, right? Next, tuition as a percentage of core revenue. So this is good. This metric looks at the extent to which a college relies on tuition for revenue. So the lower percentage, the better. In other words, if you're not completely tuition dependent, then if something happens, let's say something broke out that was worse than COVID and nobody could come to your college, are you going to go under because you need that tuition revenue, or do you have other sources to carry you? So I think this is a good one. This is also 15%. So those are the big three that count the most: endowment assets per full-time equivalent student, primary reserve ratio, and tuition as a percentage of core revenues. The fourth thing is what they call viability ratio. This looks at a college's assets relative to its total liabilities, and it just looks at its ability to meet its long-term obligations. So that also makes sense to me to use that at 10%. And then they look at core operating margin, the 10% here. So this looks at whether a college's revenue from tuition, donations, investments covers its educational expenses. So that's operational efficiency. So the last two, let's say, for example, the long-term obligations one, the fourth one, let's say you got a bond. Let's say you took out a $100 million loan to build this incredible, science center. Well, you got to look at your ability of your assets to cover these liabilities. So I think that makes sense. They have one called return on assets, 10%. This looks at the change in a college assets year to year as a measure of their financial strength. That's fine to me. Then they have 7.5% on just yield. You said, what kind of yield are you talking about? The same old yield we always talk about. Admissions yield. If you don't know what yield is, it's the percentage of people that say yes to your offer. So you put out an acceptance letter, it's a yes, it's an accept. How many people reply and return with a deposit? Some schools have less than a 10% yield, and some schools are pushing close to 80. That's a measure of the strength because it speaks to your desirability as a school and your enrollment health. And once again, if I have to admit 10, 12 people to get one, that's a little shakier financially than if I can admit 2 to get one. And by the way, if you get 1 out of 3, even 1 out of 4 sometimes for private schools isn't bad in regular decision. There's a lot of competition out there. Next, they look at percentage of freshmen receiving grant aid. And I actually get this because it's actually a sign of strength as an institution if you can give out need-based aid. Because as soon as schools are struggling, they're going to start shifting need-based aid to merit-based aid. They're going to say, we're not getting enough kids here. We're going to have to start incentivizing people, dangling that carrot, that merit scholarship. If you can give away a lot of need-based aid, then it is a sign of financial health. I agree with that. And then the last thing they look at is something that's always been used since I started doing, as director of annual giving fundraising in 2001. This was a big thing back there. And that is instructional expenses per full-time equivalent student. So this is basically how much money are you spending per student at your school? And it's everything. How much money do you pay for administration, for faculty, salaries, benefits, staff, advisors, career center, mental health support, all the multicultural programming, academic success center, all the programs, like everything that you spend. How much are you spending per pupil? Because if you can spend a lot, then you have a reserve and you're financially healthy, because worst case scenario, you can pull back a little. So those are the indicators that they use. I think that they're pretty good. The only thing that I would say to you is they only work for private schools, and they don't even attempt to use them for public schools. We can get into some other things that look at public schools another time, because endowment is public schools have endowment, but it's not the force and source that it is with private schools. But there you have to look at state appropriations a lot and see how much money they're getting from federal and state governments and factor that in. So one, this is only good for private schools, sorry. They looked at 868 schools. They only looked at schools that have 500 or more. Most schools do, but if you have a really small school, you're not going to find an answer there. And 94 schools got an A. So they're not doing too much grade inflation. They're only giving A's to about 11%. And a lot of schools got C's and even D's in their assessment this year. There's a bunch of them that got C's and D's. Like way more students got C's and D's than got A's. Half of the schools got C's. Half. Okay? And 148 got D's. So I'm just going to read another quote from the article that shows, man, some schools are really, really struggling out here. So this quote is from Candy Klaus. She's the vice president of customer service at an economic software and analysis company called Implant. And she's talking about her own school that she went to and how it's struggling. So here's what she says. Klaus worries about her alma mater, Wittenberg University in Springfield, Ohio, which Forbes grades as a C- for financial health. The university enrolls 1,200 students, and it's just slashing departments left and right in order to meet the budget numbers. She said, last fall, Wittenberg eliminated 24 faculty and 45 staff positions. It cut its music. It cut its music education. It cut its German, its Spanish. It cut its East Asian Studies program and majors and minors. By the way, majors and minors for all of them. At the time, President Michael Franzen said the cuts were part of a plan to stem the operating losses by fiscal year 2027. In fiscal 2023, the most recent year, Wittenberg's core operating margin was minus 30%. Ouch. Also has a modest endowment. And on top of that, says an exacerbated Klaus, Springfield was hit hard in the media after Donald Trump and his vice president were making comments about people eating cats and dogs here. So there's an example of a black swan event and plus a number of things, and there's a school really struggling. Now, I'm going to talk about this on Thursday's episode, but Trump just pulled $400 million out of Columbia just like that. Do you know how much money that is? It's a lot. So what are my thoughts on this? I think it's a good tool. It's not perfect. I still can't believe they're giving Princeton a B+, but pretty much every other imaginable school that you can look at that you would think would be really solid financially gets grades of A+, A+, A-. I'm not going to take the time to read all of them to you right now. But one other thing I wish wasn't true, but it is what it is. It is behind a paywall, but what you can do is pay $9.95 for a month and get access to it. And in my opinion, if you're interested in any private schools, or if you're a college counselor, or if you're a parent, it's worth paying the $10, access all the resources. I've looked through all the schools, and most of them make a lot of sense to me, with the exception of Princeton. I just don't know how in the world. Most of us think of Princeton as literally the wealthiest school out here. So I don't know how they got such a low grade. They might want to use endowment for more than 17.5%. And it'll push Princeton up. But anyway, it's just a really good source. And, you don't want to be looking at one of these schools if they're one of these almost 150 schools getting a D. And one simple thing you can do is you can take a look at the list. And when you look at the schools getting the A+, it's a short list. By the way, shout out to Colorado College. They got A+ in the ratings. Most of the schools on there are hard to get in, to be honest. But there's some exceptions. And so, if you're looking for a school that's not that hard to get in or hard to get in, you want them to be financially solvent and strong. And so, in my opinion, it's worth checking out this resource. But it's not gospel. Once again, just for example, I went back and looked at the 2021 version, and then they were giving endowments 15% weight. So they've adjusted them. These things aren't they're not intractable. They do change as they learn more and grow and make some adjustments. But in my opinion, it's different from like a U.S. News ranking, because you can't tell me what's beautiful to me. So I'm sorry, you can't tell me what I value in a college. So you can't put together a cumulative list and say this school is definitively number 6 and this one's number 16. Okay. You can maybe make that case for departments, music department or something like that, but you can't do it overall for the cumulative stuff for the school. So that stuff's just bogus. But you can say these are the financially healthiest schools. There may be a little quibbling, a little error here and there in your formula, but it's accurate enough that it's worth consulting. So that's why I'm bringing it to you guys today as a recommended resource. Just look it up. It just came out 2 days ago, and in my opinion, it's worth checking out. And you're going to hear me talk a lot more about money because it's for real what's going on with these colleges, and I want to make sure that the schools you're looking at are going to be around here, or they're not going to be slashing departments left, right, and center.
And now this week's interview with a special guest.
In part 4 of 5, in my interview with Kathleen deLaski, Kathleen and I discuss the correlation between parent involvement and high achievement. Kathleen tells our listeners what the Year Up program is. Kathleen tells us what a skills genome is. Kathleen tells us what the badging movement is. And Kathleen talks about what she calls the edu-training ecosystem. Kathleen says colleges need to be reimagined, and she explains what she calls the Great College Reset. And finally, Kathleen talks about students who are strategically using Coursera courses to hack their way to a good job. Listen and enjoy.
We have to focus on making students college ready. And so KIPP actually has swung back, yet again to saying we're college focused. But a lot of other charter schools around the country, I will say, are and regular schools are trying to work hard to create the optionality of other pathways, like what are the other kinds of schooling, apprenticeships, go to a community college to work on certifications. These are some of the options that people are looking at.
Yeah, and I've been gone since 22, so I'm a little out of touch. But my co-founder of this podcast was a KIPP parent, and she was just on for the start of our 8th year, and
congratulations.
Yeah, I mean, she's be an example of someone who would be incredibly passionate about what KIPP did for her kids. Both of them, I worked with both of them, boarding schools, and then really, strong college placements, excelling in college, and then doing really well. And it's sort of just the poster child. But I'll tell you something that I noticed. I know we're getting off topic a bit, Kathleen. I used to speak out about this. The kids that were the highest achievers were kids where normally there was a parent who was a college graduate and who was just grounding them in these truths. And those were the ones that were excelling, like the Anikas. And I always was worried about this other group that didn't have that type of support, and they just were not always ready for what we were showing was the ideal, was 4-year residential, try to go to as selective a place as you could.
Right.
I was a little bit of a renegade. I pushed back against some stuff, and I fortunately had the trust of my bosses to do it. But yeah, sometimes you can be really well-intentioned and some lives can get hurt if it's ill-informed.
And I think you would be a lot better supported in that view if there were sort of tried and true options.
Yes.
That also led to a path of economic success. And the good news is now, I believe that, we're starting to see the beginnings of those pathways emerge, so that, the students you're talking about who don't see themselves with an academic identity or don't have a parent to keep them grounded, can look at other options that are not less than. I mean, that's the issue.
Yeah, I think one reason probably why at my core I'm really passionate about your work and was so exhilarating. I found it so exhilarating to read your book was because I did it just like you. A lot of what you do is out of your own lived experience, right? You talk about your student, your own kids. And so with me being so involved there for so long, I saw there were a lot of kids that I always felt like, boy, wouldn't it be great if this kid went to technical school, or this kid could get a badge or a certificate or use alternative pathways, because
they have talents and skills, but they weren't always, academically inclined.
I was just talking yesterday to the founder of Year Up, Gerald Tratavian, and Year Up I feature in the book as a pathway that is, sort of really was created for students who, came from lower income families and needed a year. Year Up is the idea of it. If your listeners don't know it, but you do 6 months of sort of boot camp and then 6 months of a placement at usually like a Fortune 500 company. And I interviewed a bunch of Year Up participants, learners, and they were describing it to me like a rocket ship, that could get them to where they wanted to go, and that they had no idea that something like this was available. But a program like Year Up has trouble scaling. It exists in several cities, but it's only served, maybe I don't actually have the number. I don't want to guess, but like a pretty small number of people over the 20 years of its existence, and yet has great evaluation. Everyone agrees that it's an amazing step up. Some of the people go off to college after that, but most of them, are off and running in a well-paying job.
Yeah. I mean, I think there's so many things. If you can be a lifelong learner and then you can channel that love for learning, I just think we have to define education more broadly. Now, one challenge you discuss in the book is that employers need to develop what you call a skills genome. Talk to us a little bit about that. What is a skills genome, and do you see any evidence that colleges are developing a skills genome?
Well, it wouldn't be up to colleges. I mean,
employers.
Colleges need them in order to create better and more, more specific training. But employers have to create them, and employer associations, for example. So the reason, what I mean by a skills genome is that there'd be a map of what skills you need for what job, across the workforce. And the skills map does exist in places like cybersecurity, because there's such a shortage of workers that the government and all the employers got together and said, okay, what, to be in this job, a cyber, a watch person who's, an ethical hacker needs these skills, or, somebody who is an analyst needs these skills. And that creates a map that then schools and, universities and employers can all be on the same page about how do you get hired into this job? How do you train somebody for this job? And there's actually certifications, industry certifications that can stand in for a degree. Like, in other words, if you just have these 3 skills that are in the certification, the employer will hire you without a degree. And so it's basically sort of breaking down the degree into smaller pieces and making them, more relevant and more specific to the changing needs that employers have. So if we had a skills genome across job roles, then groups like Google, and I was talking to somebody at Google about this the other day, they could create like a GPS system, right, where you could, just like you put in for directions, you put in the job you want, and it tells you what skills you need to get there, what certifications would get you hired. And you could stack those together to get a degree at some point, but you could also build earnings power as you go to apply for a job. And you could also make yourself visible, so that employers could see you in your, we expect that within 5 or 10 years, we'll have these things called skills wallets, where you would have your different skills and trainings, and the AI agent is able to organize those as in like a resume, right, to make them visible to employers who might want to hire you. So it will create a lot more visibility across the learning and hiring landscape. So that's probably 10 years out, but if a parent has a young child, I think that's something to look forward to, in the next decade.
So is the difference between what you're talking about, the skills genome, and say badges, is that it's like a I'll say concerted effort, but there's like a systematic big plan as opposed to you doing it hodgepodge willy-nilly? Is that sort of the difference?
Yes, because the badging movement, started up, with respect to, hiring and skills probably, 10 or 12 years ago. and it's pretty organic. And so it's a little bit scattered, right? So like if you have a badge that a school has created that says that I don't know, that you took an AI class or something, it might not have meaning to employers who might hire you. I mean, it depends on how desperate they are, right? Like in the AI field, they're pretty desperate, but, that may not get you hired, a one-off badge, where if you have a systems approach where like an industry association, which is happening in a lot of the technical fields, gets together and names the certification that you need. And there are some of these, I described them in the book, in fields like, tech and cybersecurity, also in nursing and some of the healthcare fields where it's pretty clear what licenses you have to like, do CPR or be an emergency medical technician.
Now, another thing you're a huge advocate in the book is what you described as we need to make work experience an essential part of the redesigned edu-training ecosystem. And so isn't that what co-ops do or internships? Is that similar or is it different?
Yeah, it is similar. Yeah. In fact, I feature the one university that is best known for doing what they call them co-ops, but you might think of them as apprenticeships inside a college degree. The college best known for this is Northeastern University in Boston, which started out as a, sort of technical college for Greek immigrants in the 1890s that was sponsored by the, YMCA, working people that needed to get some other training. And now it is considered, it doesn't have the label of elite college, but it is harder to get into than, Dartmouth and Duke and a lot of the Ivy League schools, because parents and students love the idea of weaving in school and work, where you would, so at Northeastern, you go for your first 6 months as a student, and then they help you get a placement at a job that might be after your first year, but you basically come in and out of school, and you're not paying tuition while you're working, and then you come back, and your professors help you reflect on your experience and figure out, what did I learn? Is that what I want to do? So it's sort of like the college is your guide to figure out your career and to help you reflect and build skills in between your assignments, which sounds ideal, right? For the modern learner, unless you, if you're going to be a doctor and you need to go and take organic chemistry and all those things, fine. Maybe you have to go through that gauntlet. But for a lot of people, when they go to college, they might have an idea what they want to do. But getting some experience and then building on it in a stepladder approach just makes so much more sense, particularly given how quickly skills are changing these days.
Yeah, and Northeastern is right for a certain kind of kid. I find there's another kid that doesn't like that disruption of class or the pressure. There's a lot of pressure there, especially everybody trying to get into Google and stuff, and not everybody's cup of tea.
Everybody wants to work at Google, right?
Yeah. But one thing I will say that they've been very, very aggressive. They have very sharp elbows in their marketing, because they're not harder to get in than Duke or Dartmouth, despite the fact that they say they have a 6% acceptance rate. But that's another story.
That's another podcast.
Yeah, we get off on a tangent, but I agree with your fundamental point that the appeal of co-op is one of the things. There's no question. I mean, they went from a school that was significantly under-enrolled, like only 25 years ago, to 95,000 applications. So yeah, they've absolutely taken off. Now, another thing you talk about is the Great College Reset. I'm assuming that's sort of the amalgamation of all the things we've been talking about, but is there any aspect of it that's we haven't touched on already?
Well, I think I would like to underscore the sort of the framing principle of what I see as the Great College Reset, which I've mentioned a couple times, but let me, hit it harder, which is college, except for the elite colleges, which don't need to change and they're going to do what they do. Most colleges need to be kind of reimagined as stepladders, where you either come in and out of college in the way that we just described with Northeastern, or you can do work experiences on the side or embedded in school, and it's not like thrown on top. It's not on top of your load of classes, because I've seen kids, my own students, try to do that, and they're just like buckling under the pressure of it. It needs to be baked in a way where you're building your earnings power and you're getting work experience, because when you come out of college today and in the future, you're expected to have 2 or 3 years of experience, unless you're in a field where employers are desperate. And, that's just a disservice to students, because they get so, they're so, they get resentful about that. I mean, I see it all the time, where they can't get a job in their field, and then they feel let down by their university. In a stepladder approach, they would be building that experience. They would be, if they're in a role, or if they have an interest that's not, quote, employable, they're learning to shift, to figure out how to take those skills and make them apply somewhere else. So, it's both practical and, career building. That it may not work in certain fields, like if you're studying to become a musician or an artist, that we could talk about that separately. I think the arts is a little bit different. But for most areas, a stepladder approach to college is part of the Great College Reset. The other thing I should mention, Mark, is that what we're seeing already in the last decade, and which will become even more pronounced, is this idea that the pieces of college or chunks of learning are being unbundled, right? And so you in the future would be able to, you can do this now. Like Coursera, if you go and look around the Coursera website, coursera.org, it's a good glimpse into, a part of the future, which is that you'll be able to go online and purchase chunks of learning in many formats, right? And then the question is, which ones are quality? How do you know what will get you hired? And so, one of the things we really need to develop as a sector, and maybe you could be involved in this with your advising background, right, is we need, how do you get advice when you're doing it a la carte or DIY or in an unbundled fashion? We need more advice from somewhere. And right now, people are getting it from places like Reddit. If you hang out on Reddit, the board, the advice board, that's where a lot of people are giving each other advice. It's actually lovely to see the sort of the self-help communities that have grown up around, how do you hack your way to a good job? And so there's going to be more, I think, of people kind of doing pieces of it on their own, using the internet, and, that more people will be doing that and fewer people will be doing the 4-year degree. But the 4-year degree, hopefully in a stepladder form, will certainly, live on. Will live on through the century at least, and probably longer, because it is a nice model to residential, go off to college, and it's a lovely model. It's just kind of out of reach and not the right fit for everyone.
Friends, this concludes part 4 of my interview with Kathleen deLaski. We hope you join us next week for the final segment. On Thursday's episode, I'm going to share a few things about a New York Times article and that just literally went live 2 hours ago, entitled "Trump Pulled $400 Million from Columbia. Other colleges could be next." Susan will join me for a question from a listener. This listener wants to know, if you go to school and you get a student-led presentation, is that a red flag that the school's having financial challenges? We'll have the final part of the interview with Julia Shields-Retna and Jonathan Hughes of MIFA. Everything you want to know about 529 plans. And finally, we close. Hillary and I will continue our discussion about why is it so important for colleges to be able to predict yield. And friends, remember, college is not a prize to be won. College is a match to be made. See you on Thursday, friends.
And that's our show. A big thank you to you, our listeners, for tuning in this week. If you find this podcast helpful, please follow us and you'll get every single episode as soon as it is released. If you're interested, there are a few ways you can really support our podcast. You can click the share button and send it to your friends and acquaintances. You can help us pay our staff and our expenses by donating on our website. You can write a review for us on Apple or Spotify. I'm the producer of the podcast, but we have a fantastic team of 15. Shout out to our co-host, Dr. Lisa Ruff, Dr. David Williams, Linda Depker, Susan Tree, Vince Garcia, and Julia Esquivel. And to our substitute co-host, Sylvia Borgo. Our sensational sound engineer is Nemanja Motvich. Our amazing music is from Victor Allen Weeks. Marketing designs are from Kimberly Blass. Lily Parikh manages our Instagram. Our image editor is Talha Khan. Joyce Ducker does our website episode updates. And our webmaster is Stylianos Dimitriou. And if you want to have a coaching session with Lisa, Linda, or me, just text me at 404-664-4340. If you have a question you want us to answer, or if you have a recommended resource or article you think we should discuss, just send it to questions@yourcollegeboundkid.com. Our favorite method is for you to record your own voice at speakpipe.com/YCBK. By the way, check out our website, where you'll find lots of content that is not on any podcast app. Our website is yourcollegeboundkid.com. If you want to learn about other hot admissions topics, follow us on Twitter at YCBK Podcasts. We think of you as our listening family, and we look forward to meeting again with you every single Monday and Thursday.